These are the most important basics that you need to know if you're starting intermittent fasting. All right, just to give you some context, I was about 300 pounds about 12 years ago. Intermittent fasting was the catalyst for me. That is what allowed me to drop as much weight as I did. And then I maintained it with a lot of different lifestyles that I implement and I talk about on this channel. But anyhow, regarding intermittent fasting, we need to break down some specifics. So there's timestamps with this video so you can jump ahead to wherever you need to learn. Or if you want to sit back, relax, and just enjoy the whole enchilada, you can do that too. So let's go ahead and jump in. First up, what is intermittent fasting? Keeping it very basic, intermittent fasting is a meal timing system. That is it. It's not a diet. It is a meal timing system. I don't care what kind of diet you do, you can apply intermittent fasting with it. And in this video, we're going to cover the most basic way to do it. We're not going to get into the nuancy weeds with it. We're going to get down to the basics. And then, of course, I've got hundreds of videos on my channel that get into the particulars and get into the more advanced mechanisms if you're curious with those. So in essence, intermittent fasting is where you go a defined period of time. Sometimes it's 16 hours, sometimes it's 18, sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 24, period of time without eating food. Okay, then you have a very defined period of time in which you do eat, your eating window. This is the most important thing. Okay, if you can just section off a time of day that you do not eat and a section of the day that you do eat, you are already making steps towards having tremendous results. But let's go ahead and break stuff down even more. What is the easiest way to fast? The easiest way to fast is simply this: skip breakfast. I have all kinds of, once again, nuancy things that you can do to make it more advanced. But the easiest thing to do is to skip breakfast. Okay, you don't have to eat breakfast all the time. The most important thing is that you are compressing your eating window. Again, whether it's going to be the afternoon or evening or some other period of time. But the best way to get started is to say, 4 or 5 days a week to start, I'm going to skip breakfast. I'm just going to have coffee and I'm not going to eat until 11 a.m., 12 p.m., 1 p.m. What this is doing is it's allowing your insulin levels to come down. When our insulin levels are down, we are potentially in a better spot to utilize fat as a fuel source. That, alongside being in a caloric deficit because you're skipping breakfast, really puts you in a really nice advantage to change your body composition. This was the biggest thing for me with my weight loss. When I went through my transformation, it wasn't even hard for me to skip breakfast because generally speaking, I had like a granola bar or a croissant or a kolache when I was living in Texas, and that was about it. So cutting that out was so easy for me to mentally get across. Now, I'll touch quickly on a more complex way to fast just for 1 second. You don't have to skip breakfast. If you want to try skipping dinner, you can do that too. But that's a more advanced system that works very, very well for athletes that are working out in the morning. So if you're someone that is already working out a fair bit, you may want to try that. A couple days a week, skip dinner. It's just hard to do with the family, so it's not something I always recommend for a beginner. The next piece we have to talk about, do you have to do intermittent fasting with keto? No, absolutely not. Look, I will be the first to say, as someone that lost a lot of weight with intermittent fasting and keto, they do work very well in tandem. Absolutely. And it simply just has to do with the appetite suppression. When you're in ketosis, you have more beta hydroxybutyrate, which is a ketone body, and that has an appetite suppressing effect. Okay, so that makes it easier to get into your fast. It also makes it easier to get fat adapted, meaning easier to make fasting more doable on the regular. But people really think that they have to go together. No, they don't at all. In fact, for a long period of time, I was doing intermittent fasting along with carbohydrates. I've even done intermittent fasting along with paleo. I've even done intermittent fasting along with vegan just to test things out. Okay, the most important thing is simple. You are not eating any food whatsoever during your eating period. And if you are consuming carbohydrates during your eating period, it is very important that you are not having high glycemic carbohydrates. You're going to want to stick with things like lentils, things like brown rice. I really try to avoid the grains too, but maybe some sweet potatoes, maybe even some red potatoes here and there. So you want to really keep it low glycemic, keep it moderate amounts of things like berries that are great fruits that don't have a lot of sugar. They're a little bit higher in fructose, but the overall carb content is pretty darn low. The most important thing, no matter what though, is that protein needs to be the epicenter of your diet. During your eating period, protein becomes the most important thing, and I don't care what diet you're doing. If you're vegan, eat the tempeh. If you're paleo, eat the brisket. If you're keto, eat the brisket too. The bottom line is protein is the focus. Beyond that, vegetables become the most important thing. We'll talk more about the eating period in just a second, but you do not have to do keto. You absolutely can have carbohydrates with it. Now we'll touch on the 5 key benefits. Number 1, weight loss. I'm going to spare you the details when it comes down to how. I think it's pretty straightforward. Lower levels of insulin, that can increase lipolysis, which means more fatty acids are getting liberated out of a triglyceride into the bloodstream to ultimately go through what's called beta oxidation, where they get burned. But I'll just use my own testimony as the weight loss picture. I lost a lot of weight. I will tell you, it works. The next one is cognition. Okay, what they say is that a quiet brain, a relaxed brain is a fast brain. When you're bombarding your brain with a bunch of glucose, with a bunch of fuel, the brain actually can get foggy because there's a lot of signals going between different regions. And I'm oversimplifying it, but essentially we want what is called network stability. When we're not eating, what happens is the brain becomes hyper-focused from a survival standpoint because the brain is the human's best survival tool. Better than our brawn is our brain. So when we're not eating, we get a lot of energy and glucose even that gets shuttled to the brain to provide us with the ability to survive. Fat adaptation is the next benefit. That means that your body learns how to utilize fat at a cellular level. Most of us, in the United States at least, but obviously even in the world, we're using carbohydrates all the time. Okay, carbohydrates become like the predominant source of fuel for us, so our cells get used to that. If we utilize fats as a fuel source for long enough, we become fat adapted, which makes fasting easier, and it means that when we exercise, our body is more apt to use the fats than it is to use the carbohydrates. That, to me, is like the biggest benefit, if you ask me, that and cognition. The next one is the microbiome. Huge benefits to the microbiome simply because when you give your gut a break, you give your body a chance to recalibrate and restabilize. If we're constantly eating different foods, then the body is going to constantly have to kind of change what's coming in and what's kind of happening within the gut itself. Okay, very important to pay attention to that. The next one gets more complicated, so we'll keep it simple. From a longevity perspective, there are 2 mechanisms in which fasting can be powerful. Again, I'll keep it simple. One is called NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. That is a very important currency within the body when it comes down to cellular metabolism. Without NAD, we would be dead within 15 seconds. What happens is when we're not eating, NAD becomes spared. So now that NAD becomes available to go do other things within the body. This is very cool because it can activate things called sirtuins, which have anti-aging longevity components. Additionally, fasting can help increase what is called telomerase. Telomerase is an enzyme that increases the length of telomeres, which are largely associated with aging. Now let's talk about what you can expect. This was a big one because for me, I didn't know what to expect. Okay, I was coming out of the healthcare industry. I had doctors talking to me and helping me, but nobody really knew. There wasn't a lot going on. So here's just a few simple things that you can expect. Some of them are somewhat side effect-like, but don't be scared. The first one, you might feel a little bit hypoglycemic. That's okay. That's a normal adjustment. As long as you don't get super faint or super weak. And if you do, it's okay to stop your fast early and try again the next day. You can work up to it. It's not a big deal. So a little bit of hypoglycemia as your cells adapt is not a big deal. The next one is going to be headaches. Most of the headaches are either psychosomatic. They actually are created, we think about them simply because we aren't eating, so we start manifesting it. It really does happen. The other piece is that hypoglycemia can cause a headache. So it's usually short-lived, and it usually goes away after a few days of trying with intermittent fasting. So don't worry too much about it unless it becomes intense and you get migraines. I have videos for that separately. Dehydration is another big one. Okay, the way that you get around this, utilizing electrolytes. Very important because when we are fasting, what happens is insulin levels get lower. And when insulin levels are low, it tells the kidneys to expel extra water. So extra water comes extra minerals, including salt. Okay, and salt is going to allow us to retain extra minerals. So when we lose salt in water, we lose other minerals like magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, things that are very important. And we also lose micronutrients with that. So by adding electrolytes back in during a fast, like salt, potassium, magnesium, or an electrolyte powder, you really can allow yourself to kind of retain those minerals more. That's a very important thing because dehydration is real. Another side effect is not being hungry. And it sounds like a good thing, and it is, but it can rear its ugly head in ways that you end up not eating enough during your eating period. I do think that during your eating period, you don't want to aggressively reduce your calories so much that you slow down your metabolism. So listen to your body. It's going to tell you that you're not hungry. But remember, your stomach is shrinking because you're not eating as much food. So your signals are going to be a little bit skewed. So it's not uncommon to feel a little bit stuffed or super full after you break your fast and during your eating period for the first couple weeks as you're adjusting. It doesn't mean you necessarily need to eat less. It means your body is adapting and developing the enzymes to deal with that kind of food. Let's touch on breaking a fast for a moment. This is probably the most important thing with fasting. It's not the fast itself. Well, I guess that's important, but the most important thing is how you break a fast. Okay. Rule number 1, protein first. Break your fast with protein. Protein is going to stop the fast because the body is going to see that protein came in, restorative mechanisms, things that it needs for tissue repair. But it's also going to make it so that you're satiated and you don't go raiding the fridge and raiding the pantry for things you shouldn't eat. So have a few ounces of chicken, have a few ounces of fish, have a protein shake, and then 30 or 60 minutes later, then eat more flexibly. It's important right when you break your fast that you have that protein. It's so important because it stops the fast and it fuels your muscles and it fuels the repair that you need. So critical. Do not skip this step. Okay, the next important thing with breaking a fast is if you are consuming carbohydrates, do not have high glycemic carbohydrates right when you break your fast. Just have the protein. Trust me, it's better that way. Have the protein, have some water, whatever, then 30, 60 minutes later, then eat your carbs. It's all good. The next piece with breaking a fast is during your eating period, diversity is key. That means diversity when it comes down to the kinds of foods that you eat. Lots of different vegetables, lots of different kinds of food. If you're eating carbs, lots of different types of carbohydrates. Why? Because if you don't use it, you lose it. You don't want to lose the enzymes that are responsible for breaking that kind of food down. You don't want to lose the ability. But the most important piece here is because of the microbiome, okay? When we aren't eating enough, our microbiome isn't getting the fiber that it needs. And remember, fiber is going to fill you up. And fiber is not just about filling you up. Fiber supports the gut bacteria. So it's so important that you continue to eat a diverse amount of foods so that you get the fiber that you can from all different angles. You don't want to skimp on this, okay? That also coincides with making sure that you're eating enough. If you end up restricting calories too much during your eating period, you can still slow down your metabolism because you're reducing calories so much. It's no different than reducing calories in other ways, right? So you still want to make sure that you're eating enough. But what I recommend is look at your calories over the course of a 1 week period, not every day. Okay, so if you're supposed to eat 2,000 calories per day, that's 14,000 calories per week. So make sure that you're in a deficit over the course of the week. That way, if one day you have 1,000 calories and the next day you have 3,000 calories, you're still ending up where you want to be. Okay, you just look over the course of a week so you're not tripping yourself up constantly tracking every single thing every single day. It makes life a lot easier, but that diversity is the biggest piece. Also, along with that diversity, for the microbiome, I would definitely recommend a good quality probiotic especially if you can't get a diverse amount of foods in to feed the bacteria. The probiotic that I recommend, and this video is brought to you by them, is called Seed. So that link is down below. You can save 15% off using that link. So what Seed is a synbiotic, okay? So a synbiotic has prebiotics in it, which are what feed bacteria, and probiotics, which are actually the bacteria themselves. So that combination is really cool. And they have a capsule inside of a capsule. So if you look at the technology, it's really cool. That capsule, you swallow the capsule, and then the one capsule kind of has its first stage, and then the next capsule breaks down inside your body after that, which can allow the proper colonization and allow the delivery of the probiotics and the prebiotics to the appropriate areas. Plus, they're a leader in microbiome research. So when it comes down to your eating period, when you're not able to eat enough or your stomach is just kind of trying to work with stuff, the only probiotic that I could say right now has the Thomas DeLauer stamp of approval on it. And the cool thing is, again, that link gets you 15% off. So check them out. Use code Thomas15 for 15% off the Seed probiotic, or Synbiotic, I should say, down below. Next up is exercise. What kind of exercise should you be doing? Any and all exercise, as long as you're not pushing it too hard. What we have to remember is there's a pretty complicated system, but I'll simplify it, called mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin. And when we're fasting, what's happening is we have a higher degree of autophagy. Autophagy means that cells are getting broken down, components of cells are getting broken down, and we are taking the protein from those cells and using them in different places because we're in a survival system. So the body says, I don't need this. Let's break the protein down from that and use it for that. Well, when we work out, we send a signal to the brain to repair our muscles. Well, guess what? We can take the protein, potentially, from random cells that are broken down and allocate that to building muscle. So can you build muscle during a fast? In the literal sense, kind of not, because the calories aren't there, but in like sort of the theoretical, like mechanical sense, We kind of can from a biochemical standpoint because the amino acids that come from proteins that we break down in other areas can actually build muscle. This is so important for us when we're trying to lose weight, because if we lose muscle, we don't just lose weight, we lose the ability to burn calories because muscles burn a ton of calories. So we want that. So don't lose the muscle. We try to build it. So resistance training during a fast is not going to break you down. Resistance training during a fast is going to maintain your muscle. So I would say resistance training and light cardio. Don't do crazy HIIT workouts. Don't be going to Orange Theory during a fast when you're getting started. Don't be going to boot camps. Do some mild resistance training. The key thing is relevance, keeping the muscle relevant with the body so that the body consistently is reminded that your muscles are important and that they should not be broken down. Let's talk about an interesting effect on the liver for just a second. Some people get really confused about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it's a nebulous territory for sure. But with intermittent fasting, there's some evidence that it can lessen insulin resistance. Now, I say that a little bit loosely because we can't say anything definitively in science. It's really tough. But essentially, by not eating, we're allowing our insulin sensitivity to improve, which brings down our insulin resistance. There is a good body of evidence that suggests that insulin resistance is what allows the liver to ultimately, let's just make it simple, pile up with carbohydrates through de novo lipogenesis and ultimately create a fatty liver. So there's some evidence that potentially intermittent fasting could help modulate the negative effects of a fatty liver. So fatty liver is just complicated in and of itself, but it's something that I definitely recommend that you look into. And if you're concerned with it, intermittent fasting may be a very powerful mechanism to help you possibly get it under control. Let's talk about what supplements you should start with. Okay. When we get into this category, you could look at my videos and say, well, Thomas talks about this, he talks about that, all kinds of different supplements you can utilize. I'm trying to keep it very simple for the sake of this video. The number one thing that you could probably take is going to be green tea extract, or drinking green tea. Okay, not only is it going to curb hunger, but it's also going to potentially increase what's called cholecystokinin, which can curb hunger through a different mechanism. Also, the EGCG, the epigallocatechin 3-galate, which is a complicated term, but essentially it's a catechin that can actually stimulate what's called AMPK. AMPK is a sensor in our body that essentially tells our body when we're deprived of energy or when we have a surplus of energy. In the state of fasting, we want the signal to constantly say that we're deprived. What's going to happen there is green tea is going to upregulate that signal more, so it's going to tell our body we're in a deeper fast or a deeper deficit than we actually are. So green tea is something I sip on the whole time. Sometimes I'll take green tea capsules. Another one is cinnamon. You can take cinnamon capsules, you can take cinnamon powder, whatever. Have it prior to breaking your fast because it's an insulin mimicker. So it can make it so that when you do break your fast, you don't have a big insulin spike. So try taking some cinnamon capsules or a little bit of cinnamon powder in your tea or in your water 30, 60 minutes prior to breaking a fast. Another one to keep on hand for after you break your fast is chromium. After you break a fast, chromium can be very beneficial because it helps do what is called translocate GLUT4. GLUT4 is like a big net that casts into the bloodstream to grab glucose. Okay, so if GLUT4 is expressed, or translocated rather, it means that the glucose that you do consume after you break a fast is going to get into the cell and not just circulating around in the bloodstream, triggering hyperglycemia. So taking like 1,000 micrograms of chromium picolinate or taking in, again, that cinnamon can help with the glucose getting into the cell, which could eliminate you feeling super tired and fatigued after you break your fast, which is a fairly common thing, especially for beginners. Coffee is another supplement. The caffeine itself, it's a cyclic adenosine monophosphate driver. Okay, so what that means is it's going to increase lipolysis. Okay, it is a phosphodiesterase inhibitor, so it's allowing fatty acids to get liberated into the bloodstream, which could trigger you to potentially burn more fat. Coffee, caffeine, one of the best supplements you could possibly have. Just don't overdo it. And then electrolytes, once again. I talked about that before, but electrolytes are super important simply because insulin levels are lower, so we're losing more water, we're losing more minerals, we need to replenish that. I'll talk about this next one again in a second, but I'm gonna mention it here. Apple cider vinegar during a fast works great. It drives up AMPK the same way that green tea does. And the way that it drives up AMPK is because when the acetate or acetic acid, the acetate that's in acetic acid within vinegar, goes into the cell, it actually makes the cell think that fuel has come in. So it starts upregulating these processes that end up, it kind of confuses the body. I hate to say that, but in a way it's kind of confusing the body, and it upregulates AMPK, putting you deeper into a fast. Plus it can help with digestion. Let's talk about mistakes for a second, because this is super important. First one, not having the electrolytes. Have the salt. It will make a difference. Trust me, even when you get hungry, have a pinch of salt in your water. Not having electrolytes is a big mistake. The next mistake is having too many carbs when you're breaking your fast or indulging on too many carbs during your eating period. The carbs are okay to have, but remember, you're insulin sensitive, which means that when you do have carbs, a little bit's going to go a long way, okay? So try to control it, but better yet, honestly, it's best to just keep them out if you don't need them. If you're an athlete, I understand. I get it. I'm an athlete now. I try to add the carbs in periodically here and there. But when I was losing weight, it was just easier for me to keep the carbs below like 75 grams. And if I was doing keto, I kept them below 40. So general rule of thumb, even if you are eating carbs, keep them below like 100 grams. This next mistake is for women, and that is fasting for too long, especially during their progesterone period of their cycle. Okay, that progesterone period is the back half of your cycle, and that is super important because as you get towards your period, you notice you get more hungry, right? Well, that seems like a great time to fast, right? Wrong. Okay, first of all, it makes fasting miserable because you're hungry. Secondly, the body's upregulating processes that could encourage muscle breakdown. So we don't really want that. So what you do is you shorten your fasts on the back half of your cycle. And then during your estrogen phase after your period, that's when you would go ahead and increase the length of time or perhaps the frequency of fasting. I have plenty of videos on this as well if you wanted to do a quick Google search. The next mistake is not exercising during the fasted state and waiting until you're fed. Okay, you can do this. It's not going to ruin things, but I will tell you it's a mistake because training during your fasted period, like I mentioned, it reminds the body to maintain the muscle, which is super important, but it also allows you to capitalize on low levels of insulin that might allow you to burn more fat. Whereas if you train in a fed state, you have to burn off the food that you ate before you get into that true fat burning state. Now, that's overly simplified. People could poke holes in that, but this is a simple video and I don't want to make it complex. Okay, you can train in a fed state and you can still burn fat 100%. But what's going to happen is you still have to burn through the glucose that's in your bloodstream first. I am just a strong preferer of training in a fasted state, but mainly because of the signaling to remind the body to keep the muscle while you're not eating. And lastly, I want to give you some helpful tips, helpful things that I've learned after fasting for 11, 12 years and understanding how it works. The first one, utilize apple cider vinegar during your fast, but also don't be afraid to have some along with meals because it can help stabilize glucose a little bit. That can help eliminate the tiredness. That can help you utilize the fuel better. Next one, don't be afraid of adding some lemon water or some cucumber to your water. Okay, that kind of goes along with this next thing. If it has 5 calories or less, don't worry about it. Okay, if it has 5 calories or more, it's better for your eating period. 5 calories or less, yes, technically on some degree it could break a fast, but you're going to be back in that fasted state within minutes. It's not worth worrying about. If it keeps you stuck to your fast, like having a diet soda every now and then, I don't like them, but maybe like a Zevia with stevia, just have it. It's going to keep you going and it's fine if it has 1 or 2 calories. Next one is hydrate, 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 which is a simple one. The next one is when you have cravings, have salt. Okay, salt is actually an interesting thing because we have regions in our brain called NST neurons, and these NST neurons sometimes get confused where we're actually craving salt, but we feel like we're craving sweet things. So if you end up having salt, it can curb your sweet cravings. So throughout the fast, if you start being like, oh, I'm really hungry, try having a pinch of salt. Just put it on your tongue. It's a veteran tip that I've learned over the years. So hopefully you've learned some stuff, or if you know this stuff already, hopefully it's been a good refresher and a reinvigorator to inspire you to continue intermittent fasting. Again, this was a very basic breakdown. More advanced breakdowns are on my channel. You can always do a search. I'll see you tomorrow.